You know, this film couldn't have come at a better moment for us here in India. I don't know, yes, it must have been something quite tremendous for you to make it, but for us to watch it here in India at this point of time, I think is very, very critical. And like I was just, speaking with the audience, it was like looking into a mirror. Because I mean, many of us have also been part of the women's movement, some of us who are sitting here in this audience. By the way, this audience, we're having this film screening in a college, which is the St. Joseph's College, and we have a lot of students here, young ones. We have a lot of general audience. We have women who've been also part of the women's movement, and so have been part of the kind of organizing that we saw in Aurat March. I would love my colleagues and my friends to speak, because so many moments resonate so much. Some of the moments, like for example, when the police come and say that who's the leader, and all of it's a similar thing that we face here. So we say, no, there's no one leader, we're all organizing it. So many, many moments, including the internal moments, the tensions, the kind of, what you're facing. But I think what we could see in the film was the intensity of what you're up against, in terms of, the women's movement and the way in which it has organized. I think the intensity of what you're up, the stakes are much higher. I think we are getting there in India. We took a lot for granted in our own country. We took these spaces a lot for granted. We took it for granted that we could fight the system and the system would give us space. But I think what the film shows, what your film shows, that those spaces are also very difficult, and it's extremely, to negotiate those kind of spaces, and at all levels. It's within and for women, it's within the family, it's within the home, it's within the community, it's with the regressive right-wing forces, it is with the state. So the struggle is real, the negotiations and the challenge is really coming at all these multiple levels. Now I'm sure there are many questions that will come to you, but we would love to listen to you, to really understand how, tell us a little about yourself. If you can tell us a little about what your connections have been with the women's movement, and what was your role in the Aurat March, apart from, I'm sure you were, behind a camera or trying to look at the whole picture. But what were you feeling there's so many feelings that are there in the film, and there's so many thoughts, there's so many voices that are there, so what were your thoughts when you were listening to all this, as you were watching and making the film and putting it together? Tell us a little about yourself and your journey with the film, Anam.
I moved to Karachi in 2016 from Rawalpindi, where I was born and raised, and I moved there for work. And I was making a web series, and I got connected to some young women that I wanted to participate as actors, and they just happened to be running. This woman Sadia Khatri was running a collective called Girls at Thabas, and it was inspired by an Indian academic book, Why Loiter. Some of you might have heard about it. And it started as a Tumblr page of just like girls documenting themselves, taking photos of themselves, hanging out in public spaces, hanging out in dhabas, which are traditionally not very co-ed spaces. And the idea was to sort of try to make public spaces more accessible by occupying them as women. And I think the Aurat March is a distillation of that moment for us. It was one from, in my memory, the first visible feminist social media moment, Girls at Tabas. And some of the same women became involved in the first Aurat March in 2018. And the context of that march, or the call for that march, was also Time's Up, which had become a global social media movement. And so I think there was this feeling amongst young and veteran feminists, veteran as in women in their late 30s, early 40s, that this is a time to harness and try to use social media and try to use this moment to do something. And I just happened to be there and be friends, and blessed enough to be friends with some of these women. And the first, I think, public meeting happened in my flat in Karachi. And my role really was just to help document, I think. So even from the beginning, I was helping video because that's what I'm a filmmaker. That's what I do. At that point, I also had like a one-hit wonder band called Garam Ande, and the only performance we've ever had in our lives it happened to be at the first Aurat March. And so it was just like a coming together of just like a lot of creatives and people who were organizers, like lifelong organizers. And I remember in 2018, like standing at Fair Hall, these gardens in Karachi, and thinking like maybe 500 people would show up, and then we had like 8,000 people show up. Like it was very unexpected. I think for us the success of the first March, and then every year it grew and it grew, like expanded into more and more cities, and that's when the state and the media and the right wing, I guess, became threatened, and that's when like pushback. I think pushback started happening like after the second, like after 2019's March, and so that kind of media spin of like what the march is and who the marchers are, and the way different women were being targeted, some who were organizers, some who were just attendees, and who were being like doxxed on social media. That was like one of the, I guess, reasons to want to make something more formal, like make a film about the march. I never really thought about it. Like that was, we call it Feminist Eid. That was just a celebratory day for me. It was also like, I didn't grow up very political or in a political household. So this meeting all these people was my politicization as well. And so recognizing the gap in my own upbringing and my education about like Women's Action Forum and Sindhyani Tehreek and like all these other political groups I was learning about, the history of the Pakistani left, how completely invisible it is from mainstream education, media, conversation. That was also like part of why I wanted to make this film, is to archive what I had experienced and what I knew, and not let this disappear and become somebody else's narrative.
But what has been the impact of this film? Because you said there was a pushback against the march. So the whole idea of making the film was to kind of clarify, maybe some of the kind of, or to kind of counter some of the, what was being said about the march and about the women. And as you say in the film, many of them are still under, they've been put under some some policy. So obviously there's a lot of threat, to the organizers. I just wanted to know whether this film has been shown back in Pakistan and what has been the response.
Yeah, after 2021 March, the strategy that was adopted was to single out the most vulnerable women, in my opinion, from the organizing committee in like the three major cities, and then accuse them of blasphemy. So they doctored a bunch of videos and like doctored the slogans and said, "Oh, these are blasphemic slogans," which obviously was not true. But that meant that I did not show the film in Pakistan when it was released, when I finished it in 2021. So it took me, I had to make sure everybody was safe, and it was like via mutual consultation from from the organizing committees of the various cities. The exit control thing has been lifted. So these are threatening tactics, right? So that the one organizer who that happened to is like, she's also part of like a larger leftist political party, and so it made sense that she had the worst of it. So things are better in that regard. I have shown it in various universities in Pakistan, at a film festival, but it's definitely shown more in India at this point, and the challenge with us is that we just don't have the infrastructure. I run the Documentary Association of Pakistan with a few friends, and we do screenings and festivals, and so I'm very acutely aware of the dearth of art spaces in Pakistan. So I've screened in several cities, but I wish there was more that I could do. We don't have like, a lot of international organizations that fund the arts and fund documentary or whatever, they've left Pakistan in the last few years, so we're really in a position where we're operating on very meager resources. So I'm just like resource deficient right now in terms of traveling with the film more in Pakistan, but it has screened internationally a lot, and I think it was very important actually to have screenings in the diaspora, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about culture with the diaspora, right? They all live in some like fantasy imagination of what our culture, the homeland culture should be. And a lot of at that time, like the previous government and maybe the next government, PTI's support was from the diaspora, and PTI was pretty much very against Aurat March, and so are their followers. So I'm happy that it's screened in the diaspora, but I hope that it screens more here. But it's always, you always have to negotiate spaces here and make sure there is some degree of safety for the people on the screen, even though we want to not just preach to the converted. So it's a bit of a dance one has to do. But the post screening discussions are always really, really amazing. I think I'd like to talk about the impact of the march, and I think that as polarizing as it is and continues to be, it's become a real, like, it's shifted the language. It has shifted cultural language. It has such a because of its polarization. Like, you can go to any village in Pakistan and they'll know those slogans that became controversial. And so one can have this conversation, like the language opens up to have this conversation one-on-one with people, at least, or in the media. And I think the standards, like the march and the kind of conversations it incited, has changed the standards of what what is expected from the media and expected from law. And then there's a watchdog. I think the biggest thing is that the Aurat March, as social media platforms that have a very large following and a very large impact, have become sort of watchdogs. And now it's actually funny because like anything happens in the country and there'll be like so many people like, why hasn't Aurat March issued a statement? The detractors, the people who hate Aurat March are like, oh, now you aren't, like, why are you silent on this? And I thought you were feminist. So it's funny how that opinion has like, the opinion coming from this like huge feminist platform matters to the people that are also maybe against it in some ways. So I think that what my mom calls nuisance value, that's my mother's terminology. So that's really, I think, really impactful. That this like large popular voice exists in the cultural landscape.
Yeah, that sounds so positive. That despite the kind of threats and despite the kind of consolidation of the voices against the march, the fact that it has managed to open up these spaces, and the fact that it represents, a dissenting voice, I think is something that is really fantastic. Yeah, so I'd like to open it out now to questions.
ಬಹಳ ಒಂದು ಅರ್ಥಪೂರ್ಣವಾಗಿ ಈ ವಿಡಿಯೋನ ಈ ಒಂದು ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟರಿ ಫಿಲಮ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಕನ್ನಡಿನೇ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋ ಥರ ಇತ್ತು. ಸೊ 20ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಸಂದರ್ಭ ಇತ್ತು. ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಪೊಲೀಸು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನಿಮಗೆ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಅದೊಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕಂಡಿದ್ದು ತುಂಬ ಕಲೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಗುಂಪು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿತ್ತು ಈ ಒಂದು ಹೋರಾಟಕ್ಕೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ವಿ. Thank you.
Okay, this is a comment and a question from Lata. She's thanking you for making the film, which she says is extremely important and meaningful. And it was like as I said, it was like looking at ourselves, in the mirror. So there are two comments she has. One is, she said you made the film during the COVID time. It seems to be that you made the film around that time. So what was the support or otherwise that you got from the police? That was one question. And the second thing she says, that what was very obvious in the film was the collectivization, the kind of spirit of collectivization of the women, because something on this scale, across the states and across districts, the fact that it was done. So, and the spirit of collectivization was very evident So if you could maybe say something a little more about that.
The march happened on March happens every year on March 8th, which is the International Working Women's Day. So there's sort of like a leftist alliance there, by putting it on Working Women's Day. And so I think my plan always was, and even when I like imagined the film in my head, I thought, okay, March would be on the second act, like the second end, like 2/3 of the film, and then the last end of the film would be about the backlash. That never really happened in the same way because of COVID. So Pakistan actually shut down about a week after the march. And so we were right at the edge of when things had, the news had started rolling that COVID was a thing. So Karachi is very exceptional compared to other cities, that there is the city and the Pakistan's People's Party that's usually in power in Sindh is they like to have a sort of liberal facade, at least. So they were supportive enough to have that sort of security detail, even though we didn't want that much security, but it was impressed upon us that the only way we can have the march is with that security, because there is a threat. Which is like, in one way, it's like, okay, the city and the government, is supporting the marchers, but at the same time, it's almost like Char Diwali, right? It's almost like, okay, you can do this, but we're, only within our umbrella. With this thing that somehow what you're doing is needs to be curtailed in some way. So, as you see in the film, that relationship with security and the police and being there, it's difficult, but at the same time, you see what happens in Islamabad, and so the Islamabad protesters are doing the opposite, where they're saying, where is our security? Where is the support of the city and the mayor and the people who are supposed to be protecting us, who are not interested? So it's a difficult relationship, and I think it very much depends on what the city needs to project. And Islamabad is obviously a very conservative and also a bit more afraid of any kind of protest happening.
I wish we could have had you here personally, really. If we didn't have these
One
nation-state
day.
borders, yes.
One day, inshallah.
Yeah. Inshallah, yeah.
So there are two things helped me. One from the documentary was one, it reminds me of the event that we here in Bangalore, where many women came together irrespective of the religious barrier or any caste barrier. That was during our CAA NRC movement. And then the second thing, the documentary movie really helped me to understand how is Pakistan, because we here in India think that Pakistan women's that was the only thing was just going in my mind was actually that wow, women can wear pant and shirt in back in Pakistan. It's same like India. It is there is no difference, but the thing is that the media constantly the news that what we receive, it's always about terrorism, always about women is being suppressed or oppressed. So this is the only information we hear from the media. But this is something helped me perhaps to say that the narration that what I had till today about the Pakistan has changed. Thank you for that.
I'm Dhanlakshmi. I'm working as an assistant professor in a government first grade college. First of all, I congratulate for making this film and providing us to watch this. I just want to know whether there is any impact on the society and on the policy making after this aurat march in Pakistan.
ಇದು ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ 2020 ಆದಮೇಲೆ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ವರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಇದು ಔರತ್ ಮಾರ್ಚ್ ಇನ್ನೂ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅದು ಅಥವಾ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾರ್ಚಾ ಅಂತ?
Yeah, the question is the Aurat March continuing, or was that the last one? Is one question that has come.
I want to know what is the risk involved for the people who are taking part in the march, or I mean, who is taken up the initiative, and also the people who are involved in the march.
Which you can answer in the end. Why did the film not show Hum Inqilab Hai? Because that was also, that song is, I think, it came from the Aurat March, right? And it became hugely popular here among the women's, movement and the groups, and we all sing it at every rally now we sing Hum Inkilab Hain. So I was very disappointed. I saw one of the women there who's, I think a singer who sings the song, but the song didn't feature, so I was wondering why.
So the Hum Inkilab Hai was a song recorded by the Aurat March in Islamabad, which is managed by, or was managed by the women of the Women's Democratic Front, which are allied with the Awami Workers' Party. I'll let them know how popular it is in India. If they don't already know, they'll be really happy. My focus was the march in Karachi, and I was following them, and so that became like most of my narrative. I'm really happy that it's popular in India. What was the next question? The risk involved, it varies, right? I think it varies by what privileges you have, like what kind of family you come from, what your class privilege is. I know that in year one, there was a woman in Karachi whose husband killed her, allegedly for going to the march. That's the worst thing we've heard of. A lot of people come and they, cover their face when they're at the march. The biggest risk usually comes from these bloggers, like these male bloggers who love to come to the march and like us, they'll always target the girls who they think are more like inappropriately dressed and ask them, try to make fools out of them and dox them online. So there's been a lot of like doctoring of people's posters and you know how these boys do, they'll manipulate your pictures and put your face on like some other body, blah, blah, blah. So there's stuff like that, but I think we have a very deep, like we have the power of our community behind us. So there's lawyers in the organizing committee or who are allied. There's the Digital Rights Foundation that's run by Nighat Dad, who's quite powerful. And so if there is any online doxing or harassment, she's very effective usually in taking care of it and having that erased online. Yeah, there's definitely risk involved depending on who you are and what your context is. And at the end of the day, I think it's everybody has to like make that decision for themselves when they're allying themselves, and it's very visible. It's a march, it's meant to be visible. It is a performance. I see marches as performances. So yeah, there's always that. Somebody spoke about solidarities, and I think that's the real, like the collectivization that you see in the film is the real work. The march is one day. The organizing is a few months before that, but I know that like now we're in 2024, there's been marches every year. I don't think it's doing as many cities as there used to be. So Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad are very solid. They have marches every year, they're main cities. The women in Sindh, Arfana Malla and Amar Sindhu, who are like legendary feminists, they organize the march in Sindh and they change cities every year. So they're really cool. So yeah, so the marches are continuing to grow, and the solidarities that have been formed because of the march, I really see them having an effect where, and I think class solidarity really makes a difference, because there's a lot of women in the organizing committee, at least if I speak about Karachi, because that's the march I know the best, or the people I know the best, is that some people have those connections via their social standing or their family or their jobs, and they're able to now extend their platforms to organizers who are working within their communities, whether it's the Fisher Folk community or the Christian community or the Khwaja community, who don't have that kind of social capital, or did not have that social capital prior to aligning themselves with this like behemoth now that is the march. And also that weren't as controversial, right? So like the Fisher Folk Forum, or like people who are, as you see in the film, who are trying to like save their houses from demolition, these are not sexy topics that the media wants to talk about every 2 seconds, and they're not polarizing, and so they get lost in the cracks. And so the real game is solidarity across class and across issues, and making all the things a feminist issue, in order for this work to be effective. I don't know what else I've missed.
There was
somebody asked about. Do you want to translate first, or?
no, finish it, then we'll translate.
Yeah. Somebody asked about policy change. So again, I don't think one flaw I think of the Aurat March is that in efforts to be very intersectional, we have like a 100-point manifesto. I feel like it should be more targeted. But there are a lot of, again, lawyers, especially in the first few years, who are allied with the march, and so they're. I think being allied with the march gives them a little bit more power. And so initially in the first couple of years, there was, while we were organizing for the march, there was like a separate cell almost, legal cell, that's continuously working on policy and legal transformation, which is always like, I feel like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. With our and also because our government is so unstable, there's a new person every day in some ministry to deal with. So that's an ongoing issue, an ongoing struggle on the legal front. I think that's everything.
There was one last question about whether the Aurat March is still ongoing, because
It is.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think Maniza, who's really even more tasked with heading up Karachi's march, says it's her last march every year, but then it never really is. Like her personally leaving, but it's very much going. I personally think that it needs a little bit, the Karachi march at least needs a little bit more of an injection of sort of the theatricality of the first couple of years. But we're also in a political situation where every day there's like one of those sections that doesn't allow you to congregate. So just congregating, it's still after all these years, something in itself. So yeah, we're still going.
What we would take away from here, from the film and the interaction with you, is really, one is the, like as somebody said in the audience also, we had here normally the image of Pakistan is so different as one homogenized, block. Whereas I think what the film showed was how diverse it is, culturally, politically, every which way, the kind of diversity that is there, and I think that is very precious. And also the power of collective resistance, and not only the power of collective resistance, but the collective resistance of women, cutting across, classes and communities. And I think these are some really important takeaways from the film and the interaction with you for us, particularly, given the context that we're in India. I think these were all important lessons that we draw. So thank you very, very much once again. And a big hand to Anam from all of us here.
And solidarity with the farmers right now protesting in India.
Thank you, and solidarity with you, and thank you to technology that we could have you with us, despite the nation-state borders. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hafiz.